Hello everyone, it's Turin here, and today guys I'm here with another Total War Warhammer online commentary. In this battle I'm going to be playing the Beastmen and I'm going to be facing off against Bretonnia. So let's jump right into the armies and have some fun. So for my front line I have the Gorherds, which are the dual wielding variant that do have 36 weapon strength. So in sustained melee combat these guys do pretty good damage, and against a lightly armored faction like Bretonnia they can actually do pretty well for themselves. And believe it or not, the Gorherds actually do really well against foot squires. So I like them quite a bit. They do give up some melee defense to their shielded variant, but I think having the dual wield is probably worth it. Granted, I am going to be taking some missile fire here. So in the front line, I do have all Gorherds here. In the secondary line, I do have a single Bestigor herd. So I didn't want to bring too many, but just in case he did bring some heavy armor, and even against like a group of foot squires, these guys will do quite well, although they do have very low melee defense. So it's a very atrocious trade. Granted, they do win straight up if I'm not mistaken. So just one group of Gorherds or Bestigors back here, and they're also a decent little utility tool against like Grail Guardians and things like that that are very heavily armored. So I think bringing one was a pretty decent choice here. Granted, there could be an argument to be made that mixing in a few on your front line would not be bad. So over here I do also have Morker the Shadowgave, which is obviously a staple of competitive Beastmen play. He does have the Staff of Ruinous Corruption as well as the Spirit Essence of Chaos. So hopefully we'll be able to get 3,000 to 4,000 resources worth of Chaos Spawn Summon in this game. On top of that, I do have a Gorbel in the back line, and a single Gorbel isn't bad. They're very expensive at about 1,500 resources, so I stripped him down just a little bit, brought his cost down to about 1,300 or 1,400, but still he has anti-large and armor piercing, which is very good against Bretonnia. They have a lot of large units in Royal Pegasus Knights. They have, heavy cav like Grail Guardians, which are making a very popular resurgence in the competitive meta. They're just so incredibly hard to kill, and even though I do have like some spears on the flanks and other things like that, a group of Grail Guardian with a Fey Enchantress and like an Earthblood is so hard to kill because not only do they have 120 armor, but they have very high melee defense as well. So people often use them in the front lines, and they're tough to kill. So having a Gorbel to kind of work on those guys is not a bad choice in my opinion. Aside from that, I do have a Bray Shaman with the Lore of Shadows. I do have the Occam's Mind Razor right here, so let's go ahead and zoom in here, which gives 44% weapon damage and also 36% armor piercing damage. So when you use that with the Centaurs with Great Weapons, that can be a pretty huge burst. So it's quite a strong ability. And then I also do have a Pit of Shades, which is great. If you don't overcast it, it's going to do well against Pilgrims, Men-at-Arms, all that kind of stuff. But if you do overcast it, it can just shred some foot squires. Granted, they only have 70 armor, so it's a little bit of back and forth on whether you really need to overcast it. But generally, I do against like foot squires. So that's pretty much my main core of the army. I got 2 Centaurs with Great Weapons and some Hounds, some Spears on the flanks, and I actually did get a group of Harpies. So a lot of Bretonnia players actually won't bring the Royal Pegasus Knights. Granted, I think they're really good in the Beastmen matchup, so it may have been a little bit of a bad idea on my part. But I figured, hey, maybe he's just going to go Fey Enchantress and just spam Grail Guardians on the ground like I've been experiencing, so I can get away with using a group of Harpies. But unfortunately, he did have a group of Royal Pegasus Knights here, another one here, and he also did have 2 groups of Mounted Yeoman Archers, which are actually pretty annoying. They got some good kiting in here. So for his army, he does have the 2 Royal Pegasus Knights. He has 2 Mounted Yeomen. Over here on the far side, he does indeed have a group of Grail Guardians, which, as you guys can see, 120 armor. They are actually at 109 leadership right now, so pretty substantial. He does have the Fey Enchantress right here, and the Fey Enchantress, let's go ahead and see if we can kind of get a peek in here. It's always annoying to I wish when I clicked on her, it would stay on her stats, but we'll try and catch that later. But he does have a front line of Battle Pilgrims, which I think are probably the ideal pick against the Beastmen. But mixing in a group of Foot Squires or 2 isn't bad, because they'll do very well against Bestigors, and with 70 armor, sometimes the Gorherds, they don't have the heavy STIP, so the Foot Squires can be pretty resilient. Where they do suffer a little bit is in terms of leadership. They used to be up around 70 base, but they did get nerfed down to, I think, 60 base. But with the Grail Reliquary nearby, that puts them up to 84, give or take. So yeah, it looks like their base is closer to 68. Let's actually go ahead and check that while we're here, guys. Put that question to rest. So yeah, the base value is 60 plus flank secure and Lord nearby, so that's adding up as well. On top of that, he does have some Men-at-Arms Distillers, and that's pretty much it. So let's get right down to this battle and have some fun. So over here on the far side, my opponent is getting some pretty good skirmishing with the Mounted Yeoman. Definitely punishing me a little bit for not having the shielded variant. You can see I'm taking some missile fire, and I've lost about 6 or 7 models so far, but nothing nothing too terrible. They might take 10, 12, 15 models before the fighting starts, but for the most part they should get in there and do pretty good work. So the Beastmen are very fast infantry, so you can see they're kind of scurrying here across the battlefield, and they'll definitely be able to do some pretty good work once they get up and about my opponent's forces. And you can see he's sitting up in the sky with these Royal Pegasus Knights just looking for a pick. So that's something I really like to do with the Royal Pegasus Knights, is just kind of lurk above the enemy army. And if, for example, I was to overextend or have a group of infantry isolated, or cav more specifically, he could get in and do some massive burst. 2 groups of Royal Pegasus Knights coming in on like this chariot, this Bray Shaman right here would just be devastating. They could really do a ton of damage. So as you can see, I'm keeping the Gorbel on guard duty, and I do have my Centaurs with great weapons as well as my Poison Hounds just kind of lurking and trying to mirror his movements here. And every now and often, you know, every so often I'll go over and pressure his mounted yeoman just to kind of, you know, keep him honest, because if he forgot to like put them on skirmishing or something, I might be able to catch him out and do some pretty good work. So the forces are about to engage right now. He doesn't have any like heavy traditional calf because the Grail Guardians usually just go right up the pipe. You can see he's just going to use them in the front line with the Fey Enchantress, which is so tough to kill. Because not only like do they have the high melee defense, but the Fey Enchantress also lowers your melee defense with Miss of the Lady, so it becomes even harder to make contact with those guys. So you can see the Grail Guardians, unfortunately, are just going to come right down the pipe, and these Beastmen are definitely a little outmatched in terms of just unit quality, so they're going to charge in there nice and heroic-like, and you can see them just getting knocked around. This guy gets decapitated right away, but you can see I do have the Bestigors in the back and the Gorbel right here who are going to come in and collapse on these guys and hopefully be able to do a little bit of better sustained damage. Over here on the far side, you can see my opponent's Yeomen have kind of found a position in the back, and these Battle Pilgrims are going to go ahead and engage with some of these guys here, which is actually probably a pretty even trade, although I think he does have some Foot Squires mixed in here as well. No, these are actually all Battle Pilgrims. So the Beastmen line is going to collapse here, and, well, not collapse, but engage with these Battle Pilgrims, and it should be a pretty good little cockfight here. So if we go ahead and look at the initial shock damage, the Battle Pilgrims actually took quite a bit more shock damage, so I was pretty happy about that situation. You can see Morkar, the Shadowgave, coming in, and over here I do have the Bestigors as well as the Gorbel kind of engaging right here, but with the Fey Enchantress and that healing, they're going to take almost no damage. Granted, they have lost about 2 models, so over here on the far side, I do have my Cav coming up and around the flank. You guys will notice right here, I actually decided to leave the spears. So anytime like you're in a situation like this and you have an extra group of spears, rather than sending them up the front line to just kind of blob, pull them out with your Cav. So if your opponent does engage you like this, I have a ton of spears and anti-large here. So you can see I grab everything right now and I just turn around. With that poison and those spears, it's going to be a really, really bad day for those Pegasus Knights. So everything turns around here, and you can see they're already starting to take pretty substantial damage. They've been poisoned. Their leadership is down to 40, and, you know, it's going to be a pretty bad day for them. And their speed now is 80. So these Centaurs, the Great Weapons, are not going to let them get away with their 100 move speed. Over here on the far side, I actually did use a Pit of Shades, which unfortunately I didn't get a chance to show you guys, but I did use it on these Royal Pegasus Knights, or excuse me, the Grail Guardians, and I overcasted it. So it did some pretty good damage. You can see they took quite a bit, but granted, they did get a regrowth casted on them at the same time, on top of an Earthblood. So they're just getting all their resources poured into these guys, and they're performing pretty well, already having racked up 50 infantry kills. So very, very scary stuff. So over here, there's some Battle Pilgrims and some other guys with the Fey Enchantress putting up a pretty good fight. The Gorbel's having a little bit of trouble finding home, and you can see the Miss of the Lady just draining all of these infantry, which is just so powerful. Over here on the top, I just kind of waited for him to engage those Royal Pegasus Knights, which he did, and this group actually got devastated, being brought down to 5, and then I pulled the Harpies in, because I had the Harpies literally like sitting in the wings of the battle just over on the far side. So these guys get in here, and they're going to start tearing up some of these mounted Yeomen. So the Harpies are quite a bit slower, but, you know, once they do get close, it seems that they get a little bit of an acceleration from their charge, so they're actually able to close that distance and you know, do pretty well for themselves. And with 44 weapon strength against like the 40 armor, these mounted Yeomen, they're going to do really well for me. And you can see these guys are actually already shaken and exhausted. So that's pretty early on to be exhausted, whereas my other units, most of my units are actually fresh at this point. So we get in there, get a nice little engagement. You can see there are some routing Battle Pilgrims, but it's a very, very close battle. The balance of power is extremely even, and my Cav force is in decent shape. I did actually do a little bit of cycle charging, but my opponent is getting very, very effective Earthbloods here. So I have like Ungor Spears and some other guys kind of fighting in here, but you can see the Grail Guardians and the Foot Squires standing shoulder to shoulder and doing very, very well. So I do pull in some of my Centaurs with Great Weapons to try and help out and get some armor piercing here against these Foot Squires and against these Grail Guardians. But with the Miss of the Lady, it's just so tough. Like, it's draining all these low-tier Beastmen infantry, and they're definitely not ones that are going to stand up and sustain combat against like these very, very elite troops here. Although you can see some of these Foot Squires flying from off camera, which is always a nice thing. The Chariot's doing pretty well for me. It's only racked up 9 kills, but granted, you know, as the game progresses, it actually gets a little bit better and better when some of these troops become more sparse. When they're kind of bunched up like this and they have like Grail Guardians and the Fey Enchantress in here, it's a little bit tricky to get in there. And I also did take some very, very heavy focus fire from some of his elite units earlier in the battle. So over here, you can see the Gorbel is coming in pretty hot. I do also have some Chaos Spawn that are now in here. They're doing a pretty good job. And Chaos Spawn just thrive against like infantry in general. Like even against armor, they have like what is it, 120 weapon strength, give or take. So let's go ahead and take a look here. Yeah, 120. So even though they might not have the most armor piercing, they're still going to do very well against armor. And you can see the Gorbel has gotten in here. And what I want to do is get the Gorbel on that Grail Reliquary, because it's going to be incredibly tough to like break this core of infantry with that huge leadership and immunity to psychology and all that kind of stuff. Granted, I don't think I have anything that really causes terror. I think the Gorbel just causes fear. Yeah, so I don't think there's any big issues with like terror routing and whatnot. But as you can see, most of my infantry Infantry Corps has kind of routed off. The balance of power has tipped in my opponent's favor. Over here I do have this Chariot coming back in, kind of a bit of a last stand mechanic. And Morker in here is, he's fighting the good fight, and he's very, very tough to kill. And Grail Guardians, they don't have like the heaviest hitting attack, so against something that's very durable like Morker, they're not going to really just cut him to pieces. And you can also see I did get this Gorbel on this Grail Reliquary, so he's going to start beating this thing down and doing some pretty good work. And if I'm not mistaken, the Grail Reliquary does count as a large unit, so you can see it's taking some pretty big hits. I do have some spears coming back, but my opponent still has some Royal Pegasus Knights over here. But on the far side, I'm actually doing pretty well for myself. These Gore Herds having racked up 34 kills. This other one has 30 kills, facing off against these Battle Pilgrims who actually have 81 kills, so some pretty good value from my opponent there. But I still do have these best scores that are kind of fighting tooth and nail in here, and are able to clean up a lot of the Battle Pilgrims. And even though they have really low melee defense, they still have 100 armor, so the Battle Pilgrims have extremely low armor piercing, so they're not going to be able to get through these guys terribly efficiently. You can see this guy's getting in there pretty hard in the paint. But yeah, the battle's going pretty well for the most part, extremely even henceforth, and it's just made for a really, really great battle. And you can see over here, it looks like my opponent is casting another Earthblood, so definitely getting some good wins. Oh, that was actually my Pit of Shades, my apologies. So I know you guys love some slow-mo Pit of Shades, so I get a pretty good little cast here. And none of his units were low enough to get a Spirit Essence of Chaos. So I just found kind of his squishiest pocket here with some of these Battle Pilgrims and some of these other guys. And I was like, hey, let's nuke these guys down. And if I can get a Spirit Essence, I think I can turn the tide of this battle. Because up until now, I don't think I have gotten, anything other than that one Staff of Ruinous Corruption. So I really needed that kind of buff. You can see the Gorbel in here is just continuing to generate massive value. This Grail Reliquary is actually almost destroyed. So if he's able to kind of beat this thing down, it's really going to change the tide of this battle. And a lot of these infantry and peasants who are eager right now are really going to drop down. You can see the Gorbel actually does kill the Grail Reliquary, so getting some pretty good value out of him henceforth. Over here, now that these troops are very, very low, I'm going to be able to get a Spirit Essence of Chaos, so I drop that right in there, and it's really going to help out quite a bit, because again, they are unbreakable, so even though they don't have a support and their flanks are being pressured and there's a lot of pressure everywhere, they're going to be able to fight pretty hard in here. They do have the back of the Gorbel, so definitely a very monstrous Beastmen army in here, doing some somersaults, getting pretty hard. So things are good, but he does have these Royal Pegasus Knights, so if he gets some pretty good little charges, it looks like they're kind of trying to decide if they want to go in there, but they'll do really, really well at skewering those Chaos Spawn here, who actually have 15 armor and very, very low melee defense at actually only 25. Granted, it is higher than the best scores, believe it or not, which you wouldn't think, but Worker in here is continuing to fight. A lot of his units over here, the Mounted Yeomen, are starting to run out of ammunition, which is nice. You can see the Fan Enchantress has a nice little pocket here, just kind of healing everything up, but these Grail Guardians have just been getting healed all day, and now they're down to about 35, 46 leadership, but still, I mean, Grail Guardians are basically they're just so elite, and their leadership is so high, and they just go, they go to the bitter end. So the problem is whenever I bring back a lot of like low tier infantry like Harpies, they just like get routed off by the Mist of the Lady. It's just this perpetual damage across all of the models that's just very, very tough. But Morker in here is going pretty hard. I do get some Harpies in here, so they're doing a little bit of burst damage to these guys. But still, that -8 melee attack on all my troops is just so strong. And you see my Harpies actually get routed off here. The Grail Guardians and the Mounted Yeomen getting a nice little engagement here with that Earthblood also benefiting them quite a bit. So over here, my Gorbel, unfortunately, is broken. Over here, I do have some Bestigors that have engaged on some of these Royal Pegasus Knights, so this will be a pretty good little engagement for me. You can see some of these Royal Pegasus Knights kind of getting taken down by the very heavy armor piercing. Granted, they're not the most heavily armored cav, but they still do have 80 armor, so having some AP against them is going to be quite nice. So they're fighting against some Battle Pilgrims, but unfortunately, there are some Foot Squires coming back, and that's a very, very dense group of Foot Squires, which honestly will probably be able to get through these Bestigors without any issues, especially if the Fan Enchantress is able to kind of make her way over here. So just a very bloody tooth and nail fight in here. You can see the Battle Pilgrims are down to 14 models, but unfortunately there are 39 models here against the 19 of my Bestigors, who, granted, are a little bit more expensive. They're really not a terribly cost-effective unit for how much you're paying for them. I honestly think that Bestigors should probably cost maybe 50 to 75 to maybe even 100 less. Because Beastmen in general, like if I had brought Kazarak this battle, like this would be a very tough battle, and honestly I think I would be very, very far behind. Granted, the balance of power still very heavily in my opponent's favor, so it's looking pretty grim at this point. I do have some of these Battle Pilgrims, or excuse me, he has some Battle Pilgrims over here, some Foot Squires. He does also have some Mounted Yeomen coming back as well. So it's just a pitch fight, but these Chaos Mod are really keeping me in the picture. And what's really nice also is my Staff of Ruinous Corruption is coming off cooldown, and I do have another Spirit Essence of Chaos. So if I'm not mistaken, I'm actually casting it right here, right on top of those Grail Guardians. So I kill all of his Grail Guardians right there, and I get another group of Chaos Spawn. So what my opponent probably should have done, and something that you guys have pointed out in previous videos, is that when you have a group that's like very low like that, just pull them back, because eventually I would have gotten impatient and used it on a group of Foot Squires. Then he could have pulled that back, because that was a huge change in the balance of power. You can see see, it actually put me pretty far ahead because I don't really have much left. I just have these Chaos Spawn and Morker who are just kind of fighting tooth and nail in here. Let's go ahead and take an overarching look at the battlefield right now. So if we look up top, I actually have 42 troops to his 116. Granted, a lot of his troops are very, very low tier troops. He has some mounted yeomen over here. He has some over here, and you know, some fleeing foot squires and things like that. Though he does have some Royal Pegasus Knights who are shaken, so they come in and get a nice little lance right here. They might even be able to kill one of these Chaos Spawn. I think they actually did take one out, although yeah, you can see that one actually died over there. So, and they straight up look like something out of The Thing. I'm not sure if you guys have seen that movie with Kurt Russell, that kind of 80s horror movie, but definitely look like that quite a bit. So we're going to fast forward a little bit here because there's a lot of kind of attrition and kiting at this point, which definitely makes sense because my opponent does have some Yeomen and some the Fey Enchantress and has some pretty good cycle charging options. And he's definitely going to want to wait for my Chaos Spawn to die. So what I do is I just send my Chaos Spawn over on a suicide mission. You can see they're just dropping like flies. And Morker actually engages with these guys, but the Chaos Spawn actually have been wiped out. So in here you can see he's just kind of cycle charging me pretty aggressively, but every time he does come in, he's taking some pretty good hits. And I'm literally just getting Benny Hilled right now. I'm just running in circles. Just the clown music is playing. Granted, I still do have quite a bit of healing left. I actually have, it looks like about 2,500 HP worth of resources left of healing. So I still do have quite a bit, which is good. And my opponent, he's at his almost at his healing cap with the Fey Enchantress, who is using an Arcane Conduit, but he still does have quite a bit of healing with these Royal Pegasus Knights who are shaken. These guys are wavering as well. So right now it's a lot of cycle charging. So just to kind of spare you guys the misery of this back and forth, I'm just going to kind of fast forward it. But still, the outcome is very uncertain. I mean, the balance of power is very even. It's one troop to his 15, but his stuff is very low tier and very beat up because Morker was able to kind of be, you know, pretty durable throughout the course of the battle. So every time he comes in, though, he's taking losses. So, you know, even the Fey Enchantress is getting chased down, but he gets some really nice cycle charges on here, and I'm just still just running in trying to catch these guys, and it's just a complete circus. So I'm going in here, and I believe he does get another Earthblood here pretty soon. But you can see what he's trying to do is keep the Fey Enchantress nearby, so he gets a little bit of a drain, but Morker's healing is kind of outpacing the damage of the Fey Enchantress. So thankfully for me, it's going pretty well, and he's very, very close to army losses. You can see those mounted yeomen. I don't know where they went. They kind of rode off somewhere, but they actually rode off into the sunset, and right now he just has some of these Pegasus Knights in here, but every time they come in and knock him over, usually he'll stand up, although he laid there for quite some time. I'd actually be curious to see if the exhaustion actually affects how long they lay on the ground for. That would be really funny. So I noticed he was kind of getting bullied around a little bit, so I do pop the Apocalyptic Vision, giving him the melee attack and leadership. But still, at this point, you know, he's just coming in, but every time he comes in, he's taking an attack here and there. The poison definitely helps out quite a bit, but everything is just exhausted at this point. It's just a tooth and nail fight, and the Fey Enchantress finally is getting low, and we are able to pull out the Pyrrhic victory there, and that is truly a definition of a Pyrrhic victory. So very well played to my opponent. You know, the Grail Guardian front line is just popular in a ton of matchups. It's really strong in vampire counts, especially against factions that, you know, are using like cheap spears for anti-large like I was. Thankfully, I did bring some armor piercing with the Centigores and the Gorbel, so I was able to get in there a little bit, but still, it's so tough to kill, especially with the support of the Fey Enchantress, who, if I'm not mistaken, does give a magic resist aura. So even like answers like Foot of Gork and things like that aren't going to be quite as good. So regardless, very well played to my opponent, X-Breed Priscilla. It was quite a bit of fun. Look forward to seeing you again on ladder, and I hope you guys enjoyed this Beastmen cast. Got more content coming soon. Stay tuned, guys.